Okay, everybody, welcome. As we begin our presentation here today, I'm going to ask you to make sure that all of your phones are silenced because we are recording this. So just double check those for us. We're excited to have Dr. Matt Draper come back and present to us again here today his presentation on frustration, conflict, and pressure. We have hopes that this will be an ongoing video series that we can do with him and have him come back about every 3 months as long as he likes us. So everybody be nice.
As long as I like you. I liked you before I met you.
So we'll turn it over to Matt and we'll get started.
Thank you, Adam. So what we're really talking about today is stress. And these are just 3 manifestations of stress. In fact, the primary ones. So why do we talk about stress? Well, because it's killing you. Okay, have you guys heard of these things called antioxidants? You got to get your antioxidants. Got to get your that's healthy because oxygen is slowly depleting your body. Well, just like a fire consumes oxygen to burn, you consume oxygen to live. All of you are fires that are slowly burning. Okay? One of the things that accelerates the speed of the burn is stress. And so when we look at this particular chart here is just about the health costs of stress arising from the workplace. One of the things it says about the American work ethic is when we poll people about what stresses you out the most, work is often the #1 thing. So it's not coincidental that I'm here at work talking to you about stresses caused at work. Right? One of the things that I would like to nudge our employers is many of our jobs are inherently stressful. Let's say you work for, a developmental center. There are inherent stressors built into that particular job. One of the things I would nudge the employers about is, so knowing that, how can we treat our employees kindly? How can we be civil and respectful because the job is already hard? And so if you see this, we've got some of the symptoms associated with chronic work stress. Sleep deprivation, neck pain, people skipping lunch, skipping meals, right? Stressed eyes, difficulty sleeping. And by the way, the chart keeps going and going. These are just the top few, okay? So job stress is estimated to have cost the American economy $300 billion due to absenteeism, diminished productivity, and accidents. Okay, it's coming from the Department of Health. So this is a big thing that we're looking at. It's a big deal. Now, the other thing I'd like to talk about is that chronic stress, work-related chronic stress, decreases your life expectancy by 3 years. Now, some people say, oh, that's at the end of my life. I didn't want those years anyway. Okay, I appreciate where you're coming from there, but let me add a little bit of salt to the soup. It's not just that it decreases your life expectancy, it decreases your quality of life and shortens your life at the same time. Okay, there are a lot of what are called stress-related diseases, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines, heart disease. There's all sorts of things that are associated with stress that decrease the quality of our life until we die. So therefore, knowing how to cope with stress and deal with stress is an important part of us living healthier longer. So one of the things we learn to do is to define our terms. So what in the world is stress? Okay, I looked it up. You guys will love this. A state of balance. So first we need to talk about homeostasis, then we'll talk about stress. So homeostasis is a state of balance among the body systems needed for the body to survive and function correctly. In homeostasis, body levels of acid, blood pressure, blood sugar, electrolytes, energy hormones, oxygen, proteins, and temperature are constantly adjusted to respond to changes inside the body. Excuse me. Sorry, both changes inside and outside the body to keep them at a normal level. Stress is anything that changes homeostasis, okay? So it's been cold outside lately. When you're cold, what does your body do to compensate? Shiver. That's brilliant. Because what shivering does is it contracts our muscles, and when our muscles burn sugar, it generates heat. So therefore, when you're shivering, your body is trying to heat up. Some people have the urge to put on a jacket, to put on warm clothing. Some people have the urge to buy an RV called the Sunseeker and move south, right? All of these are examples of homeostasis in action. Okay, so our body compensates. So it raises blood pressure, heart rate, etc. Okay, one of the things that we see, for example, as a potential source of stress is there's a phenomenon in therapy we call flooding. Okay, Hillary, you're in grad school, you're probably learning about this, right? Or you will at some point. So flooding is what happens when somebody is in an emotionally intense situation. Their heart rate accelerates, often in ways they don't know. In fact, we see this disproportionately common among men. So there are these little devices that we can clip on people's fingers. They're O2 meters that also measure heart rate, not just oxygen saturation. And when we talk to people in marriage counseling, as the women, presuming a heterosexual relationship, as the women are starting to talk about stressful things and they're feeling heard and validated by the therapist, their heart rate goes down, but the man's heart rate goes way up. And it's really fun watching that when you've got a monitor right here and you're looking at the couple and you look at the man's heart rate and go, whoa, bud, you're flooded right now. He goes, no, I'm fine. And I'm like, check your O2 sensor, you know what I mean? And so it's one where there are various things in our environment that we're constantly responding to in subtle ways. And our body is trying to achieve homeostasis. Can't everything be okay? We don't need to talk about this. Let's sweep it under the rug and let's just be fine, right? That is a psychological attempt at homeostasis. So these compensation processes are very important because it demonstrates a fundamental truth about all of us. Our natural state is a state of rest. Okay? Our natural state is a state of rest. That any time your body is stressed, homeostatic processes, all of these things will kick in to try to bring you back into rest state again, homeostatic state again, where everything's fine. You're hungry, your blood sugar starts to change, your blood chemistry starts to change, and you compensate by eating. You're tired, right? There are certain stress hormones that are released by the body when you're tired, and the body compensates with sleep. It is always to try to get you back to baseline again. Okay? So the natural state of the body is a state of rest. There's a contradiction, though, built into our bodies. If we remain at rest too long, our ability to cope with stress stays very minimal. Okay? So there are some people who go to these places called gymnasiums. Now they're shortened to gyms. Like I live pretty close to this big gym in Spanish Fork, and I drove by the other day because it's spring break. Holy cow, that entire parking lot is packed. As I drove by the front and I'm looking inside the windows, all people sweating on machines and lifting heavy iron off the ground and everything else. What they are doing is they're forcing their bodies out of state of rest in order to increase the range of stresses that they can take on. Okay? And just like some people do it physically, we can also do it psychologically. We can do it relationally. One of the things that intrigued me in moving to Utah, when I'm doing couples counseling, I disproportionately find myself teaching couples how to do two things compared to the other states where I've lived. One is sex. You think that would be basic. People have been figuring out from time immemorial, but culture can complicate that process. And number two is anger and how to fight. Right? Isn't it interesting that I come to a culture where I have to teach people how to fight in a healthy way because they've been taught that anger is bad and fighting is bad, therefore they never do it, and therefore their relationships cannot handle the range of stress that other relationships can before they break. Okay, so what is stress? Back to the point. So I looked it up. So here is what the top psychologist in the world says on the subject of stress. You guys ready? Hopefully we'll tattoo it on our bodies later. Stress is the physiological response to a stressor. Okay, so what does that mean? So then I had to do a deep dive on this. A stressor has been defined by these researchers as any situation or set of external demands that requires an organism to expend resources and to adapt or to cope with these circumstances. So put it very simply, a stressor is anything that stresses you out. Now there are physiological stressors, right? It's too hot, too cold, you're hungry, you're tired, right? All of those are physiological stresses. But there are also psychological stresses. And one of the things that's interesting is those aren't all the same. Like, some years ago, some friends of mine really wanted to take me skydiving. Okay? I'm like, okay, I'm down. I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, got a lot of chronic injuries because of them, but what's a few more chronic injuries between friends? And so we go to this skydiving place out in Heber. I don't know if it's still there. But as I walk in, they take one look at me and they go, no. We don't have parachutes big enough. We would have to use the same parachutes for you that they drop Humvees, like these big Jeeps out of planes for, right? We cannot do that. And so I was kind of bummed, so I had to stay on the ground while my friends went and did some dives for a while. Here's the thing. When we take two people and we throw them out of an airplane, when they jump out of an airplane voluntarily, one of the things that we find is that their physiological response to stress is identical as if somebody was thrown out of an airplane involuntarily. So imagine you're watching a spy thriller featuring, say, I don't know, Tom Cruise, and they've got a big chop-socky kung fu battle going on the cargo area of a plane. And of course, dramatically, the back of the plane opens up, and as they're fighting one another, our hero is madly trying to get on a parachute while people are beating him up, and he's kicking people out of the plane. As he dives out of the plane, following the soon-to-be corpses of the people he's thrown out of the back, the physiological response to stress is identical, okay? But you notice the meaning is very different, that my friends will put themselves in this dire physiological crisis by skydiving, because the body is screaming at them, we're gonna die, we're gonna die, we're gonna die. But when they frame that differently, woohoo, yeehaw, fun, then the long-term damage from that is near zero. Okay? What they're doing is like they're getting in the gym and lifting very heavy weights. They're increasing the amount and types of stress that their bodies can tolerate without showing damage. Okay? So there is stress due to bodily threat. For example, some years ago, my daughters decided they wanted to take some friends up to Grandpa's cabin. Now, we have a tradition when you go up to Grandpa's cabin, and it's called the night hike. Okay? Here are the rules. We leave at 11:30 p.m., and there are no flashlights or lanterns or any light source allowed. You with me? And you have to hike in the dark. Now, that sounds very foolhardy and foolish, and of course it is, because I came up with it. But what I mean by that is when people are hiking in the dark, they learn to attend to other physical senses they normally ignore. Because it's pitch black, you can't see anything. But you can hear the trees on both sides of the path. You can hear the grass. You can feel the road under your feet. There's no sharp drop-offs anywhere, so nobody's going to fall off a cliff. But as we hike, they begin to attend to other environmental cues that they normally ignore. This was actually inspired by one of my father's dear friends who came on a hike with us. He's been blind since birth. And even blind since birth, without a cane, he had no problem walking alongside us the entire hike. And I went, I wonder if that's a skill human beings can learn. And so that night I tried it. And I slipped and fell a bunch. But after a while, I got the feel for it. Oh my gosh, you can actually feel where the trail is. So this went on for years. So my daughters brought their friends over. And they wanted to go on the night hike with their friends. So there I am with 4 14-year-old girls on this night hike. Okay? So we leave the cabin, the one source of light, out in the deep, dark woods, and we get on the trail and we start to walk. And these girls are clinging to each other and giggling and laughing and making so much noise it's hard to hear the path. Okay? And so, but anytime you try to redirect them, girls, calm down. That just freaks them out even more. So I was moving extra slow because I couldn't hear where the path was. Well, as we come up around a big curve, I swear that in the bushes, I hear something pacing us. Okay? So I take a few steps, I hear rustle, 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 and the girls are giggling behind me, and I'm like, okay, girls, hold on just a second. I take a few steps, rustle, rustle, rustle. This happens 3 times. Now, I'm not the smartest man, but I cheat and I bring a big flashlight, okay, just in case. And so after it happens the 3rd time, I turn on the flashlight and click over in the bushes, and these huge eyes of a mountain lion are staring right back at me, okay? And I'm looking at it, and it's looking at me. And so it's one where y'all know big cats. You don't turn your back on big cats, right? It activates their prey drive. And so I'm looking, turn around right at it, and I'm staring right at it, and it looks for a while at me, and then after a minute, it just kind of shrugs and goes, okay, this isn't worth it. You know, those 4 little ones look delicious, but that big guy, he's going to be a handful, probably give me indigestion. And so then I watch him wander off through the grass. Now, I'm saying it all calm right now, but I was having a panic attack at the time, right? How in the world do you stay calm when there's a mountain lion looking right at you through the bushes? This is a potential physical threat, right? Our bodies are designed to respond to physical threats in our environment. This activates what is called our sympathetic nervous system. So if we broke down the central nervous system, there's like the musculoskeletal, et cetera, but we're going to look at this part, and it's the autonomic nervous system, and it has 2 parts, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems. Your sympathetic nervous systems evolved to handle crises and threats in your environment. Okay? So therefore, one of the primary reactions when our sympathetic nervous system is activated is fight or flight. Okay? Do I either fight this mountain lion or do I run away? Well, if I'm going to run, I'm not going to run very far. This thing's going to catch me. Okay, fight it is. And none of this is going on consciously. So when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, all of this blood rushes from our vital organs and out to our muscles where we need it most to either run away or fight. Now, what's fascinating is we look at how our mountain lions have changed. Okay? For example, by raise of hands, how many of you have been chased by a bear this week? No? None? A mountain lion? No. How many, okay, one person's got chased by a mountain lion this week, okay? How many of you, though, have had to deal with jerks this week or unpleasant people? Really? That few? I thought everybody's hand would go. About 2/3 for those of you watching from home. So it's about 2/3 of you have had to deal with difficult people. That's because we are evolving differently right now. Whereas our ancestors needed to evolve to handle a bear charging out of the woods to devour their tender face meats off, because we know the face is the tastiest part. But our bears aren't those bears anymore. Okay? Right now, our survival is dependent upon one another. We don't have to fight bears. We don't have to fight mountain lions. Instead, in order to survive, we have to get along with people. Like, for example, our employer. He or she is having a very bad day, and they're threatening to fire people. That today is like a bear charging out of the woods 1,000 years ago for our ancestors. Our bears have changed. Okay? So there is stress due to a bodily threat. Something's going to physically harm us, like a mountain lion. But then there's also non-bodily stress. And one of the things that happens is some people go, well, wait a minute. Is this going to kill me? And they try to soothe themselves. Is this going to kill me? Like, my boss is upset. Is this going to kill me? No, it's not. Okay, deep breathing exercises. I'm going to be okay. Great. Please do that self-soothing technique if it's going to help you. Remember, your sympathetic nervous system response was evolved from bears, raiders, mountain lions, things like that. What we find, especially when we start talking to millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whatever sociologists have come up with to categorize us away from each other, is that we're hearing increasingly from young adults that they'd rather die. That the social stressors are so acute, they would rather fight a bear than deal with online bullying or deal with their unreasonable employer or this particular bad breakup. Right? Our evolution is changing. Our bears have changed. So when it comes to these bodily responses, we had fight or flight, and now we've got 3 more that human beings have evolved to take on. One is freeze, like they don't know what to do. Like some of you may experience this. You're dealing with an angry boss, an angry spouse, road rage incident, somebody's coming at you and you just freeze. You don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, you just shut down. Okay? That's also a sympathetic nervous system response, like fight or flight. Likewise, faint. Right? Some people just go, they just noodle. They just pass right out. Right? Another one that's very interesting when it comes to social stressors is a fawning response. Right? And that is, who is the deadly bear in my environment, or who is the mountain lion, my angry employer, my angry spouse, whatever else, and I will do what I can to soothe and appease them, even though I'm in the midst of a panic attack. I'm not going to show that, and instead I'm going to calm them down and give them what they need. Okay, that's a fawning response. So regardless, when we look at stressors, they fall into 3 broad categories, right? Frustration, conflict, and pressure, which we'll get to here in a moment. So here are some examples of the ways our bears have changed in society. Loneliness. You all have probably heard the adage that after grandma died, grandpa died from a broken heart. Have you guys heard that kind of language before? Or it could be after grandpa died, grandma died from a broken heart. Some colleagues of mine researched that phenomenon, and they're very curious about it. And what they found is in a given couple, there is one of them who disproportionately facilitates and perpetuates connections with other people than the other one does. Okay? For example, when I go out of town for conferences or I'm gone for a week for seminars, etc., my house becomes silent. My sweetheart doesn't think to invite other people over. She doesn't have the barbecues and the cookouts and the cheese tastings and the kind of things that I just habitually set up and do. It doesn't cross her mind to do that. And so she's not reaching out to the kids and saying, hey, I'm gonna grill up some steaks on Sunday, come over, right? And it's not because she doesn't like anything, it just doesn't cross her mind to do that. I'm more of an extrovert, she's more of an introvert, so therefore I seek out and perpetuate social connection, and she doesn't think to. So when we see that if the extroverted spouse dies first, the introverted spouse dies much more quickly. If the introverted spouse dies first, the extroverted spouse does not die any quicker, right? Because the measure is loneliness. When we look at people who lose a spouse and we measure their loneliness, if their loneliness skyrockets, they're much more likely to die, right? Now, I'm not saying that those who are extroverted who lose a spouse don't grieve. They do. It's just as intense. It's just as life-transforming. But there are many other relationships that they have, so the toxicity of the stress of loneliness doesn't build in their system. Okay? So, another example of bears. Relationships. Oh, boy. So that's number two. Work is number one stressor for Americans. Relationships is number two. Like, for those of you who have been through a divorce recently, or heaven forbid are going through one, that ranks in the top 5 most stressful things Americans can experience. Like, number one is death of a child. Like, to give you an idea how catastrophic that is, and the list is like 200 items long. Divorce is in the top 5. Like, my niece and my nephew and new niece just moved in with us, because they're starving college students. We have a lot of rooms to spare, and so family knows, okay, we can give Uncle Matt cheap rent. We'll pay him cheap rent. I have a deal. Come to my house, and this is what I tell my nieces and nephews. Rent's $200 a month with chores, and $1 billion a month if you don't do chores, okay? So come do my yard work for me, we're good, okay? So they move in, and within 2 weeks, she's moved out. They've been married 5 months, okay? Have you guys noticed that the rates of marriage in this country have been doing this? The rates of people in committed relationships have been doing this. Relationships are now more complicated than ever, and therefore more fraught with stress. Now, it's that catch-22, because they're also the source of most people's fulfillment who are in healthy relationships. But how in the world do people get into healthy relationships these days? We may have to have a workshop on that just so I can research, because I'm not entirely sure. Okay? But what I see is a disproportionate amount of fractioning going on amongst these young couples, that their relationships are not as easy or as harmonious, et cetera. They seem to be more fraught with peril. So that's a bear in our society. It's something that kills us with stress, okay? And of course, materialism, the wanting of stuff. Excuse me. The wanting of stuff. One of the things that we find is that Americans carry more credit card debt than average compared to other people in other countries, meaning consumer debt. Okay, they're buying stuff they can't afford. By the way, what fascinates me is this correlates with religion. The more devoutly somebody is a member of a conservative Christian faith, like evangelism or Mormonism, the more likely they are to have more credit card debt. It's fascinating. Okay? And so when we did a deep dive into that some years ago, my little research team and I, what we found is this notion that God blesses with comforts and pleasures and stuff is part of the unconscious bias there. And so therefore they get stuff to feel like they're being blessed and that they're okay. It's a very interesting thing. And so that's disproportionately, again, amongst evangelicals and Latter-day Saints. Now, is it true for all of them? Oh, no, but it isn't disproportionate. So one of the things that we can do is we can combat loneliness. My mother is not doing well, for example. And so therefore, we've already had a meeting with me and my 7 siblings, and we've gone, okay, what are we going to do about Dad when Mom dies? And we've got it all set up. Dad will not spend more than 2 nights without one of us contacting him. You guys get where I'm coming from? And of course, if you ask Dad, he's from Pleasant Grove, Utah, steel worker, farm boy before he became a BYU professor. He's fine. He doesn't need anything. Yeah, but people need stuff, even if they don't know it, okay? So loneliness we can combat, right? Relationships. We can endeavor healthy relationships. And how people get into healthy relationships, I don't know. But I do know how healthy relationships are perpetuated across the generations. And so working on our physical health, right? This morning I got up and did my old man yoga for a while. Got all these chronic injuries. One way I can stay on my feet for more than a minute, yoga. Okay? And so there are things we can do there. Likewise, materialism, right? There's this notion in Buddhism that which you own owns you. Okay, if you get a big fancy truck, that's going to take a lot of time, effort, and energy, and it may be worth it to you. But every time you have to care for that particular car or item, et cetera, it shows that it owns you. It's taking your time, it's taking your resources, et cetera. And so with that in mind, some people go, okay, I'm going to start minimizing what we need. Like every spring we do a huge load to Goodwill and DI. You know what I mean? That which we owns us. Let's not be owned as much. Now, there are some things, though, that are harder to combat. Technologization, okay? That increasingly, technology is becoming part of our metaphorical DNA. We talked about this last time. This is a huge source of your stress. Mine too. I'm being a hypocrite right now. You caught me, okay? I'm being a hypocrite right now. Yesterday morning, for example, I was reminded of this. I peel my sorry corpse out of bed. My phone is already buzzing, and I look, and there are 3 urgent notices from clinical practice, a public speaking gig I've got in a month, and things like that. Like I was immediately, first thing upon waking up, hit with demands to perform at 100% right now. And then as I'm getting in the shower, a call from my youngest that went to voicemail, Daddy, I'm in trouble, right? My parents didn't have to deal with that. My grandparents didn't have to deal with that. Back in my day, you could call somebody on the phone, and it was expected that nobody would answer, and there was no voicemail. There was no nothing. You just have to try again. Not only that, though, but if you did leave a voicemail, those old tape recorder click, beep, there was no expectation they would call you back immediately. Whereas, especially I've noticed when I'm texting with people under 40, if I don't text them back, they start to get anxious like I'm mad at them. And so therefore, I have to take time out of my very busy day to say, no, I'm not mad at you. Why are you upset? Well, you didn't text me back immediately. I'm busy. Okay? And so we have all of this social pressure as manifested through this little diabolical device in our pockets. Okay? So it's one where I told my sweetie, okay, I am turning this off at 10 p.m. I'm not turning it on until 9 when I'm at work. Like this is not a good way to start my day. Now, some of you are on call. I appreciate you're wedded to the devil. But if you're not, something to think about. Okay, another one is pollution. Oh boy. I love living here in Utah. Like Springville's the favorite. I've lived in 42 places. Springville's my favorite. Except on the brown air days, and we get a lot of those. Right? That has chronic stress. It is a chronic stressor on our bodies. Did you guys know that Utah has the highest incident of non-smoker lung cancer in the United States? We're number 1. Okay, maybe we shouldn't be proud of that. But it's hard for us to fight that individually. Likewise, economics. So one of the things that happened is inflation went like this. State employees' paychecks did this. You guys notice that? They went up and got tiny COLAs, what was a quarter, right? And so you got these tiny little raises in pay, but not keeping up with inflation. Like how much are eggs now? Right? 7, oh my gosh, right? And so therefore, there's not a lot we can do about that. Likewise, our bodies are not flawlessly designed. Therefore, we will have health crises, right? Even for those of you who go to that gymnasium and lift the heavy iron and run on those treadmills, you too will someday have a health crisis. Now, I appreciate your healthy activities will decrease the likelihood of that, but it will still happen. Everybody dies eventually. So the three manifestations of stress when it comes to the relational styles of stress, right? We have the physical stress, bear charging out of the woods at you. We're not talking about that, okay? Now we're talking about the kind of stresses that happen in the workplace and in relationships, okay? The first one is frustration. So frustration is the feeling associated with a barrier between you and your goals. There's something you can do, want to do, should do, and there's something getting in the way. So this is what's called a task-oriented frustration. Now, there's another type of frustration as well, and that is what's called being-oriented frustration. So being-oriented frustration is when you would like to be treated as an equal. Okay? For example, I worked in a clinic not too long ago, and the owner would come in and speak over everybody else in the room. Like anytime he wanted to, he would just talk over people. And he wouldn't apologize for interrupting. He would just do that. And he would make decisions and wouldn't listen to feedback from the people he was making decisions about. Does that sound familiar to anybody but me? Okay, a few of you, okay. And so therefore, it was frustrating because what I wanted was a state of equality where I could at least be seen human to human with him, right? That we could talk about this instead of him just coming in, hearing this much data and making this big a decision, okay? So likewise, when it comes to equal rights for women, for minorities, LGBTQIA, et cetera, that what we have is frustration around a state of being called equality. And there are a lot of other states of being. For example, some people have the goal to be pain-free or to be healthy, and there are all of these things that get in their way. A friend of mine was on doctor number 5 before she finally got an accurate health diagnosis of a rare autoimmune disorder. Doctor number 5, 10 years of her trying to get healthy, of trying the diets, going to the gym, retreating and trying essential oils even, like anything she could, rubbing crystals. Nothing was working, nothing was working, nothing was working. So for 10 years, she had that frustration because she wanted to be healthy and have that particular state of being, and there were all of these barriers in the way. So these particular frustrations can be due to internal factors as well as external factors. Internal factors are things like, I feel like my brain's not letting me do this. I don't know if you guys have had that particular feeling. This is going to be associated with anxiety, depression, ADHD, where we see the goal and we know we can do it, but it's like we can't get everything aligned internally in our system to get it done. Okay? And so we become our own barrier at that point. So procrastination, right? There are people, like I was a teacher for many years, and there are some people who perform what I call banking anxiety, where they'll procrastinate something they need to do, and they'll just shovel that anxiety into tomorrow until finally tomorrow, and they can't lift the shovel because they've shoveled it for tomorrow to the point where it's more than they can bear, and then they shovel like mad to get things done. I can't tell you how many students through the years told me, Draper, you don't understand. I start writing my best midnight before the paper is due. And me as the person who has to read those crappy papers, I beg to differ, right? What you're doing is you're banking anxiety until it's motivating, right? And so sometimes it's a lack of skill. In the various, when I'm consulting on Silicon Slopes and with other businesses, one of the things I find is the Peter Principle is very loud. So the Peter Principle is people get promoted into their optimum incompetence, okay? For example, imagine a salesperson. She's dynamic, she's capable, customers love her, she's the top in sales, and the sales director position comes open. And she goes, I'm the best at sales you've got, and so therefore they hire her into the sales position. Is being good at selling to customers the same thing as being good at leading people? No, those are two very different skill sets, and therefore she has been promoted into incompetence. Right? And I see this time and time again for both men and women, right? That I'm consulting in a case right now where this poor guy was promoted and he has none of the skills required to do the job, right? He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't have any of the skills. And so therefore, that can be extremely frustrating. Now, this can also be due to external factors. Physical barriers, right? There are some things that are physically in the way of us getting where we want. So the other day we were trying to go to a concert. Here's the concert venue, and all of the roads were blocked off, and the parking lots were on the other side of the barriers, right? It was one of the strangest things that in order to control the traffic flow to and from the concert, they blocked off the parking lots for it. Somebody wasn't thinking, right? And so it was very frustrating. Right? There were literally physical barriers. Now, sometimes there are policies and procedures. There is an idea I have, and I'm hoping you guys will buy into my idea, that anytime an organization sets up a new policy, they give it a name of a person. Okay? So Hillary, you're at UVU right now, right? And so there are signs when you go through the major concourses, starting in the liberal arts building, going all the way through the university, and every 50 yards or so there will be a sign saying no rollerblading, skateboarding, et cetera, inside the buildings. I know the kid that should be named after. You know, it was 8 o'clock at night. He comes zipping down that long hallway in the liberal arts building on his skateboard. A professor carrying big, heavy boxes of final papers to grade crams right into her. Papers go everywhere. And therefore, now there has to be a rule. No skateboarding inside. So I say, I can't tell you how many things would be the Draper policy. You know what I mean? The reasons we have to have this because old Draper, you know what I mean? But that's something that happens, is that policies and procedures later can get in our way. For example, a dear friend of mine who is a professor was going through cancer treatment, and his particular cancer is one you can never be cured from. He will have it until he dies, hopefully many years from now. But it ruins some of the joints in his body, so he got around with a push scooter. Well, the university didn't stop to say, hey, are any of you in need of push scooting or some kind of conveyance to get through these very, very long hallways? No, they didn't ask. They just passed the policy. So now he has to leave his office 20 minutes early. He's got his walker, and he has to hobble the half a mile to his classes, right? Some of you here at work may experience that same thing. Well, we could do that, but it's against policy. Hey, I need to run one of the students down here to the, nope, you have to do this, you have to call this, you have to form this in triplicate. He's bleeding, we don't care, here's the policy. You guys get where I'm coming from? And so that can be a great source of frustration, okay? And then, of course, what was it Oscar Wilde said? Hell is other people, right? When we look at what's really causing people stress in the workplace, yes, it can be physical barriers, yes, it can be policy and procedures, but the number one is who you work with and who you work for, okay? They can provide the biggest source of barrier, okay? Like, one of my favorite jobs of all time was working at Walker's Food and Fuel on American Fork when I was in college. Now, it's weird. Why in the world would I enjoy working at a gas station? There's nothing inherently likable about me and gas stations. It's the people I worked with, right? 33% of Americans in a poll back in 2020, 33% said they would forego a raise of up to 20% of their annual salary if their current supervisor was put into a different role. That's a third of Americans would forego a substantial raise, okay? So it's other people that tend to be our biggest source of stress. Okay, conflict. So the conflict, the technical definition, is the simultaneous occurrence of two or more incompatible needs or motives. So one form of conflict where we have two incompatible needs and motives is internal. This is when our head is saying one thing and our heart is saying something else. Your head is going, she's got all the red flags of the past 3 girls I've dated, and your heart's going, yeah, but she's so hot. Okay? Or likewise, let's say you're in a difficult relationship right now, and your friends are fielding very logical arguments as to why you should break up. And their arguments are logical, they land, but your heart's going, but I can't leave. I've got all of these emotional commitments, I've got all of these emotional loyalties, I can't just sever those, right? So head versus heart. Like, logically, I could get a better job that would pay more money, but I love the people I work with. Head versus heart, okay? Now, here's another thing that probably happens to you all sometimes, and that's what I call the choice between two bads, okay? Where you've got 2 options or more, and none of them are going to be easy, and they're all going to suck, right? That's going to be a form of conflict. Do I do this thing? It's going to get my face eaten off, or do I do this thing and I'm going to lose a foot? Like, make your choice, okay? For example, there was a cousin of mine who just kind of disappeared on us for years, and then I learned much later that her husband had very carefully severed her relationships with other people. He was very controlling, very abusive, and one of those processes is isolation. No, you can't go out with your friends. No, you can't see your family, etc. And so one of the things that kept her trapped in that particular abusive relationship is the problem of bads. He has all of the resources. He makes all the money. Everything's in his name. If she leaves, she will have nothing. Is it easy to live in our society with nothing? No. In fact, one of the things that if you all have been paying attention, our society is very good at removing resources for people who have nothing, right? So therefore, it's the choice between bads. Do I stay in this abusive relationship or do I drive my kids into homelessness, right? Choice between bads. So likewise, there are also choices between mixed goods and bads, right? That cause a lot of conflict for. Here are the advantages and disadvantages of doing this. Here's the advantages and disadvantages of doing that. Like a while ago, a friend of mine came over and he really needs to change jobs. And so like a good friend, okay, let's do a advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons list, shall we? And so we sat for an hour, and we had this big legal pad, and by the time we were done, the number of pros matched the pros, the cons matched the cons. Oh, crap. No decision was made that night, okay? Then the other one is the choice between goods. Sometimes we have really two good options, but we're afraid of fear, like FOMO, like we're going to miss out, or opportunity cost, or the sunk cost fallacy, that there's a lot of things that go on there that then make it a conflict when it could be something to celebrate, and instead it stresses us out. So external conflict, this is when there is somebody outside of us and their wants and needs conflict with our wants and needs. Now, there is real conflict and then there's perceived conflict. Okay? Real conflict is there is really this one thing and either of us can have it. Perceived conflict is, can we split it in half? One of my favorite deep thinkers is a fellow by the name of Emmanuel Levinas, and he talks about how when he encounters the hunger of the other, it is though the bread is snatched from his own mouth. I appreciate his compassionate response. But one of the wisest things I've seen, for example, happened at a preschool the other day. There was only one pack of Teddy Grahams left, and there were 2 kids. And so I could see the teachers walking forward trying to placate one kid or the other. But the first kid who got the Teddy Grahams, she just splits the bag wide open, hands her friend a handful, she gets a handful, problem solved, right? They didn't even need to talk about it. So sometimes there are ways of dividing this where it doesn't need to be a crisis. And so one of the things that can happen is the importance of clarity, defining our terms. This can be a big ask. When we're in a stressful staff meeting and there's conflict, people are going at each other because there's what they want, and they're going at it. One of the things that I find is people usually run on assumptions. The big crisis with my daughter is that she and my son-in-law aren't communicating well, right? And so she's on the phone with me and she hates it when I do this and she won't talk to me for a month. But I'll be like, honey, you seem to be running on some assumptions. Here are some assumptions that you're running on. You're not articulating this with your husband. Please articulate this with your husband. You guys get where I'm coming from? Because she's like, for example, she travels for a living because she's a tattoo artist and she's very successful. And so she does these particular visiting slots at these various studios around the country. And when she shows up, she's gone for 3 weeks at a time. And when she comes back, her husband's pouty and upset that she was gone for so long. But he says with his mouth, I am so glad you're so successful. I'm proud of you. But he also gets to miss her when she is gone. So what she assumes is, oh my gosh, he's upset. Therefore, I can't go on these big business trips. And I'm like, honey, you're running on an assumption. He gets to be upset. He gets to miss you. That doesn't mean you can't go. Talk to him. And so she was supposed to call me back last night. She didn't because they were up until 3 a.m. actually using words. Okay, actually talking. Oh boy, okay. And so same thing can happen in a staff meeting if people will just stop and define their terms. What do we mean? What assumptions are we running on, right? And clarifying from there. Sometimes that can help solve the conflict. Sometimes it makes it worse. Okay, so pressure. This is a force that motivates us to accomplish goals. Okay, pressure, anything that motivates you to accomplish a goal. For example, after this, I'm going to need a bunch of ibuprofen and some coffee, right? So there's this internal pressure because my energy level is going to be low, my arthritis is flared up, I'm going to go get that. Pain is pressure, okay? But likewise, looking at bills coming due, that's pressure to get more hours at work. You guys get where I'm coming from? Like my poor son-in-law is not knowing that he's pressuring my daughter not to go on these big tattooing conventions and whatnot. You guys get that, right? Pressure. And so years ago, two psychologists named Yerkes and Dodson proposed a law that as stress increases, as pressure increases, so too does performance. Okay? But then after a point, as stress and pressure keeps going up, performance tanks. Okay? So one of my side gigs in college was training boxers and kickboxers, right? I'm too big and too slow to ever be a grand champion, but I'm a very good teacher. So therefore, let's teach these guys how to reach the state of what's called optimal stress or optimal arousal. Right? If they're too stressed, for those of you that are in the sports world, some people are beaten before the game even starts. They've stressed themselves out too much. They're way on this side of the curve. Likewise, for those of you that are students, you stress yourself out too much about your exams, you're going to be on this side of the curve. The idea is to learn to cope with pressure so you can keep it into an optimal state. Okay? So this particular pressure can be personal. This can be what we call intrapsychic. This can be pressure that you have generated for yourself. Okay? There are a lot of ways this manifests. I'd like to talk about the ways quickly we moralize the amoral. If we have time. Okay, I think we've got a few minutes we can do this. Okay, so moralizing the amoral. Let's take something about stacking these chairs after this is done. Okay? So somebody's going to put the chairs away, presuming there's something else is needed in this room. So that is an amoral event. There's nothing about heaven and hell, good or bad, about putting the chairs together, really. Right? You can say, well, somebody should put the chairs away. That would be kind for the people who need to use this room next. Okay. Yes, out of kindness, it would be a good idea for them to do it. But when we start using language like should, must, ought, have to, etc., what we're doing is we're moralizing something. You guys stack the chairs, your supervisor's mad. You shouldn't have stacked the chairs this way. They should look this way. They've just turned this into a moral crisis, like God himself, you're damned, right? No, this is not a moral issue. This is a matter of preference, right? Not 10 Commandments kind of crap. This is, okay, supervisor, you would prefer that I stack the chairs this way. Well, it should be that, you see how much that adds stress? Okay, their internal stress is now becoming external stress. It's now becoming a stressor for you. But we can do that with ourselves as well. It usually manifests in what's called perfectionism. And hopefully when I come back, we'll do a whole unit on what perfectionism is and how to combat it, because it kills people, okay? And it is interesting, the correlations between various subcultures in the United States and their perfectionism rates. And so hopefully we'll go over that. But that's a way where we moralize the amoral. So one of the things that I encourage my friends and family to do is count your shoulds. Right? Anytime you're using should, must, ought, have to, you're taking something that is maybe a preference and you're making it a crisis. You're adding all this pressure to yourself that may not be necessary. So start counting your shoulds. Okay, so you want to run the next mile, right? You want to push yourself. You want to get one more rep in. You want to finish this project a day early. Nobody's demanding that you do it. This is internal pressure, okay? But it can be interpersonal as well. This can be task-oriented. I need this on my desk by 5. And you're like, you need what on your desk by 5? The project we talked about. We haven't talked about the project for months. I thought it was delayed. No, I need it on my desk at 5. Wah! How am I going to do 40 hours worth of work in 3 hours? You guys get that? That's external. And so one of the things that we learn to do with task-oriented is when we can to negotiate and renegotiate. Okay? So negotiate is, and this takes a risk, and this can be very stressful because not all supervisors or colleagues are kind or understanding about this, is here's the timeline we have, here's the timeline that's realistic for me. Right? Or here's what you think the scope of the project should be. Here's how I think it really needs to be. Right? And then once the project is started, to renegotiate, saying as we learn more information, as we get more data, this particular thing needs to change. Okay? And so that can help with pressure a bit. Now, one of the things that I ask people when I do business consulting is to ask yourself the question when people are talking about the to-dos in a given business or in a given organization, is it possible and is it fair, right? If you can keep that in mind, then that might be a prompt for you to negotiate and renegotiate. Because it may seem impossible, therefore, you don't want to add frustration to your pressure or conflict to your pressure. So therefore, you can ask about this. Okay, how could we do, like, how is it possible? Here's the frustrations I can see, the barriers that might get in our way. Here's the timeline that's going to add some pressure, and here's the conflict of interest we may have, where I'm doing this part of the project and you're doing that part of the project. They're not aligning well, right? Now we've added more stress to our stress. So, primary coping skill is self-observation. So number one is self-observation, right? And this is, how am I doing? How am I feeling, right? How many times have you been in the midst of being upset with somebody before you realize that you're taking it out on somebody or that you're upset with them? Sometimes our mouths go off faster than our brains can keep up with. The other is to observe the other person. It's really hard to do with how busy we are to just stop and just observe somebody else. How are you doing? And then the other thing we need to observe is the context. A lot of things we take out on each other, we didn't cause. An external third party did. This could be policy, procedure, law, shared supervisor, something else, but we end up in conflict with one another. For example, we had a family dinner, and my brother-in-law goes off that the reason why America's struggling financially is because of all the welfare going to poor people, and so we just need to remove welfare. Now keep in mind, it's his broke son that's living with me right now. Okay, and so I just look at him and say, wait a minute, so it's the poor people that are causing this country financial stress, not the wealthy and powerful who've put laws in place and, yep, it's those poors. They shouldn't be able to buy soda or sugary snacks. No, you just got to control the poor people. Okay, now we're at conflict because of a third party, right? So I could observe him, and he and I could then start a conflict, or I can observe out loud that you and I are at conflict because of what's going on of policies, procedures, and laws of people outside of this room. You guys get what's going on? So there's 3 levels of observation. I, thou, and it. Okay? It meaning the context within which we are situated. So when it comes to coping with frustration, name the goal, name the barrier. Right? You've paid attention to yourself, you've paid attention to others, you've paid attention to the context. What is the barrier? What's in the way? Name it. And sometimes it'll take days. Sometimes it'll take a second, right? It's right there. They're in my way. I know what the barrier is, and they're standing in my way. I can name it. Her name's Amy, and she's right there, right? But sometimes it's complicated. And so it takes a minute to slow down, recognize it, and name it. If internal, specify and solve, okay? Is this a lack of skill? Is there some physical inability you have? Then you can go from there, but you can't do that unless you name it first. Oftentimes we just dwell in stress and it just eats away at us. And we don't say, okay, what is it and how can I solve it? Okay? So specify what you can and cannot control, right? For those of you in recovery, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay? To accept or strength to change, and then to know. To do that, you need to name it, right? You need to say, okay, this is what I'm going through. So therefore, then I know whether this is acceptance or strength that is needed. Okay? So, assertiveness, the art of pleasant persistence. I swear this is how I get most things done in my life. That email every morning at 9 a.m. from old Draper. Hey, where are we at with this particular project? This is where you are. And update when you're ready. Sure appreciate it. Thank you. Next Monday. Haven't heard from them. Hey, here's where we're at this retreat. Voicemail. Starts persistent email every Monday and then a voicemail on Friday. So you got Monday and Friday. And then eventually a visit to their office on Wednesdays. Right? Pleasant persistence. The other is recognizing, is that person being a jerk? Am I being a jerk? How can I maybe exercise not being a jerk even if they are? There is an art called malicious compliance that is a passive-aggressive way to do this that is sometimes encouraged and sometimes discouraged. But malicious compliance is usually when a supervisor or, there's a law from it going, this is the way you have to do things. You go, are you sure? And they go, yep. And we go, okay. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to remove the barrier of frustration by doing exactly to the letter what you want, even though I've tried to tell you there will be all of these unforeseen consequences if I do. Okay? So, evaluate the goal. One of the things that I'd like you to keep in mind, is it worth it? Is whatever thing you're going for that you're getting all frustrated about, is it worth it? Is this worth your sanity, your health, your serenity? Is it worth it? Because the answer, the moment that's no, you may back away from that particular goal. And just backing away from the goal can alleviate a lot of frustration. So when it comes to conflict, name the conflict. Okay? Actually put a name to it. Okay, so you and I are fighting over this. I can't tell you how many meetings where I've done that, where there's a lot of contention and I'm participating in the contention. And I catch myself trying to observe, which can be very hard, and go, okay, so it sounds like this is what we're fighting over. Because oftentimes people lose the thread of what the conflict is really about, and now they're just arguing because they're upset. So try to bring it back. Try to name, this is what we are in conflict over. Okay? And sometimes they'll look at you and say, no, that's not what we're fighting about at all. Oh, here we've been arguing for the past 20 minutes. What are we arguing about, right? And so, internal, list out each side of the conflict. What do you value? The head-heart dynamic, right? Journaling. If you're adding pressure to yourself, I have to decide this by this point. If that has to be there because there really is a deadline. If not, write it out, think it out, right? Journaling can really help with this. That comes from the research of Jamie Pennebaker at Texas at Austin, where he's like, just sitting back, it's called percolating, like coffee, where you just sit back and at night just jot down some ideas about it, what you're thinking and feeling about it, can help you alleviate some of that internal conflict. Interpersonal. You all, I'm assuming, have been trained in de-escalation. Okay? You notice how when you start doing it in your interpersonal relationships, things get a lot smoother? People hit you with this level of energy, you hit them with this level of energy, right? You can do that with yourself too. Okay, I hear you. I get it, right? You can practice dropping the energy level with yourself as well. So empathic listening is something that is an important key skill to dealing with conflict. If I understand what you're saying, here's where you're coming from. Okay, I get it. Doesn't mean you agree, it means you understand. There's a little digression. In ancient Hebrew, when the Old Testament was written, the definition of sin was very different than it was for the Greeks, right? For the Hebrews, if you remember, it's to turn away from. Like, I'm sinning against you if I turn away from your humanity, treat you like an object, right? Dismiss or disregard you, that's a sin, right? And whereas repent is turn towards. I'm so sorry I objectified you that way, right? I'm turning towards you as a fellow human. Okay. So one of the things that I learned from an old rabbi is that how you can get harmony for people to look at one another is to join them in how they're looking first. So if they're looking, here's the problem, this is what's going on, etc. If you get into and see their point of view, even if you don't agree, but really show that you understand and feel and get where they're coming from, then eventually, over time, you can add more data where you can see things either similarly through compromise, or they may even come to see it from your point of view, right? But that empathic listening is key to that. It's very risky because sometimes people are jerks. In the end, though, it works more often than not. So the nice-kind dichotomy, nice is when you're placating somebody's feelings. Oh, aren't you so special? Oh my gosh, bless your heart, right? That's nice. Kind is, we will see to one another's needs over the long run, even if it is uncomfortable, unpleasant now. It's key to healthy parenting, right? Key to being a healthy manager or colleague is I will do what is right for you, even if it's uncomfortable right now. You hate me in the moment, but I hope you'll forgive me when you see this is going to work, because I care about you enough to do the hard thing. Okay, and then pressure. Like with frustration, is it worth it? Okay, and it may be. So is this something you have to do for the short and long-term survival of self and other? Right? Is this worth it? Is it worth human welfare, yours and others? If yes, focus on grit. Right? There's a lot of people who come to me and say, I can't because I have ADHD. I can't because I have anxiety. I can't because I'm depressed. And my answer is, yes, you can, and it's going to suck. Right? There are ways to cope with ADHD. There's ways to cope with depression. There's ways to cope with anxiety. Where, yes, you're dragging extra weight that other people without that don't have, but you can do it. Right? It's exercising grit. Grit is when we persevere and move ahead in the face of pain and difficulty. It's one of the top predictors of success in this country. It's not being free of disability. It's with whatever disability we have, we add grit to it. One day, for example, my last year of teaching, a student came up to me and she showed me her IEP. She has an IQ of 80 and she's at a university. Okay? That means good luck. She's barely functionally literate, right? She's barely functional at all. And so she said, may I please have a little bit of extra time for exams if I need it? It takes me a long time to read through. I have to sound out every word. I'm like, dude, I got you. Let's do this. She earned a 95% in my class. And Hillary, you've taken my classes, right? And it was grit. She only took a couple classes at a time. And that was her full-time job, was those classes. But she graduated at the end of that semester with better than a B+ average. Grit, right? And so grit is something we can practice, and it's a skill we can develop. Another thing, if you're feeling internal pressure, is it born of unrealistic expectations? Again, hopefully we'll have a unit on perfectionism. Is this something that I've blown up to be much bigger than it needs to be? Can I right-size it? Perfect is the enemy of good, right? And so how can I make sure that it's just good? It doesn't need to be perfect. And so if external, is the pressure realistic? Can it be negotiated or renegotiated? If it can be, then how do we set up SMART goals? How do we set up accountability, relationality? How do I do this in a way where I don't feel I'm the only one? That the person telling me to do it is actually a source of support and help. It's like, that's one thing as a graduate student I learned. As a professor would come into like a research lab and say, Draper, you're doing this. And I would, after being overwhelmed for a full year, I started saying, okay, Dr. Stephanie, can I please meet with you every other Friday? I said, why? Just do it. I don't have the skill or competence to do this. And so, yes, I will figure it out, but because you're the one demanding that I do this, I'm accountable to you. And therefore, rather than finding out in 6 months whether or not I've done a good job, I'm going to need a little bit of skill training. It'll only take 15 minutes of your time every Friday, right? You guys get where I'm coming from? If they're demanding it of you and you're accountable to them, then you can ask them to be a source of aid, support, skill development, et cetera. They may say no. At least you can ask. Okay, and then likewise, can you set up SMART goals? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely, to break it down, to help you cope with the pressure of it. So, some additional skills. Check either or thinking. Try practicing yes and. One of the best things I can do for young adult mental health, like teenagers, is put them in comedy improv classes. I know that sounds so weird, but one of the things you do in comedy improv is when you've got a group of people together, you always yes and. Somebody will say something ridiculous and you say yes and you build to it. Just like sometimes when we're in staff meeting, people say something ridiculous. Now it's not comedy, now it's tragedy, but we can yes and that as well. Right? And when we start yes-anding with ourselves, the pressure eases way off. The internal conflict goes down. Yes, and. Yes, my boss is unreasonable, and I'm going to ask other people for help. Yes, this particular student or client that I have is very, very difficult to work with, and I'm not alone in this. You guys get how this works? So yes, and. And of course, one of my biggest ones is mindfulness. Breathe, take a minute. Where am I at? There are no tigers jumping out of the woods to eat my liver. Right? Right now I'm safe. Right now I'm healthy. Okay, just take a minute and breathe. So, 3 others when it comes to other people is acceptance, compassion, and gratitude. And I know we're over time, so we'll bracket that for another day. So just accepting where things are at, having compassion for yourself and others, and actively daily exercising gratitude for the people around you. Okay? So I have some more ideas we'll share another day. And then this, we talked last time, my daughter and I have a podcast now called Deep Lore of the Mind, where we talk about a lot of the hidden assumptions behind what's going on in our society. And so if you're curious about psychology, big ideas, things like that, it's on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple. And of course, you can reach me on Instagram at Old Dr. D. Thank you for your patience. I lost track of time for a minute. I'm grateful you all came.